Tonight on Bridge City News, how do we end racism in Canadian healthcare? Alberta will centralize EMS dispatch services in 4 communities in the province. And one woman's pledge to shave her head for a good cause.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller says there are some things Ottawa can do to end racism in Canada's healthcare systems, but a lot of it will be up to provinces to fix. Miller says he is committed to getting justice for Joyce, referring to Joyce Echaquan, who filmed racist comments directed at her by a nurse and orderly as she lay dying in hospital in Quebec last month.
We heard a powerful testimony from Carol Dubé, still as a single man, now raising a family of 7, still mourning, that he wants us to continue, the federal government, provincial governments, all Canadians to continue to fight racism in all its forms. He wants justice for Joyce. He wants us to espouse Joyce's principle, which is still a principle which is being consulted with his own community for their support, to eradicate systemic racism and to ensure that Indigenous peoples have first-class health care. The reality is health is a jurisdiction that is jealously guarded by provinces. We need their help to reform it. We cannot reform the licensing bodies. We do not have the power. The Supreme Court has said it clearly in black and white. We need their help. I think they're already eager to address racism in the health system. I don't think you'll find a single provincial minister that will say the contrary.
Health Minister Tyler Shandro announced yesterday that Alberta will be moving ahead to centralize EMS dispatch services in 4 communities in the province. Those include Calgary, Red Deer, Lethbridge, and Wood Buffalo. Shandro wrote a letter to the 4 mayors informing them that he would not overturn AHS's decision to fully integrate EMS dispatch into Alberta's health system. This move comes despite major opposition from some mayors, including Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman. The president of the Chinook Autism Society is raising funds in order to help families that have children on the spectrum. Hope Ashley Rudick says, especially in a time like this, extending a helping hand to families that could use the extra support is what makes her want to go the extra mile.
Every once in a while I get this crazy idea to just cut my hair off or color it crazy colors, and so this time I decided that since my dreads are about 2 years old, it's about that time. So I figured if I'm going to make a change, instead of combing them out, I'm just going to shave them off, but I may as well make it worth it. And I'm going to try and raise $3,000 for Chinook Autism Society. We don't receive any government funding, so it's all community funded through donation, and we take applications in for families that can't necessarily afford sensory tools and things like that. So we've been able to give blankets and tablets, and we've done some other sensory tools and things like that, body socks. So we try and just put that right back into the community to families that need it. I just need more advocacy and more awareness in the community, because I myself didn't know what autism was until I became a parent of someone with autism.
The Lethbridge Farmers Market will be coming to an end on October 31st. Bridge City News was there this afternoon finding out what the vendors have to offer as the season comes to a close.
The knives have been around for over 70 years, and my mom and I have been selling them for just about 30 now. You can actually try my knives for one, which is really nice instead of buying a box off a shelf. They're lifetime warranty. Most people we find go 2 to 5 years before they need to be sharpened.
It's just a husband and wife team. We just do this as a hobby. Our kids grew up. We decided that we needed to do something which we're both engaged in, right? So we said, well, let's try making kind of cutting boards and cheese boards. And our big thing was we wanted to make them and make them affordable to people, because they can be very expensive, right? And we wanted anybody who stops here to be able to afford anything. And that's how we kind of developed it as we went along, right? We've been going 3 years now, so I will never cut 2 pieces of wood the same size. I just start off with raw pieces of wood, And obviously they go through the planing process, the sanding process, the cutting, the routing, whatever it is I'm going to do with them, or jointing or whatever. And then basically they go from the garage, which is where I work in the cold, upstairs where Mandy kind of burns them, draws on them, and then they come back down to me for finishing, right? So I never really know what we're going to get, and I never really know what she's going to put on it. And she, conversely, she never knows really what she's going to get neither, right? Neither of us have a background in any of this, right, you know? So no, Mandy never had a background in art. We just took it up, as I say, 3 years ago, and it went from bad to better to good, right? So, yeah, as I say, we just enjoy doing it, and I think what we produce is pretty good, so.
Trying to fall in love can be hard enough, but when you lose thousands of dollars by way of a romance scam, it can be an even tougher pill to swallow. As Micah Quinn explains, these romance scams seem to be preying on users, and for one woman, she got out before she could get scammed.
According to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, romance scams are one of the lowest reported scams, but they are some of the highest dollar amounts they see in terms of victimization.
So in 2020 to date, we're upwards of nearly 4,000 reports on romance scams involving almost 74 million in reported losses. But it only ranks about number 12 on the list right now in terms of top reported frauds. And it has a lot to do with the emotional, psychological stigma associated with romance scams.
For one woman named Belle, she says she met a man online who said he was a cardiac surgeon for the United Nations and World Health Organization.
Said he worked there for 20 years and he was getting close to retirement. So he wanted to come home and just be able to relax and live a normal life. He started off like very romantic, very caring, very kind, generous, very supportive. I was going through a personal hard time in life, and he was just very supportive with that.
Belle says she encountered some red flags after talking to the fraudster for a while.
One thing I never did was give out any information that would that they would have access to anything. They didn't know exactly where I lived. He didn't know my email address. He actually asked for my email. Don't ever do that, because they can get access your information by email. Wanted my banking information, and that he would, get his friend to deposit the money. Never ever give out your banking information, anything like that.
There are some key indicators on how to spot one of these scams.
When a online relationship escalates really quickly, somebody's professing their love, claiming they want to marry you, and you've only been chatting with this person for a shorter period of time, 2 weeks to 2 months. At the same time, we see them carry on, so it's about trust. The fraudsters are trying to gain your trust, so they're willing to take their time if you're not jumping into that relationship really fast.
Thompson says it's important to report to your local police if you do encounter a romance scam. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Recapping one of our top news stories. Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller says there are some things Ottawa can do to end racism in Canada's healthcare systems, but a lot of it will be up to provinces to fix. Miller says he is committed to getting justice for Joyce, referring to Joyce Echaquan, who filmed racist comments directed at her by a nurse and orderly as she lay dying in hospital in Quebec last month. And a look at weekend weather. Get out your boots and shovels because Old Man Winter is here. Tonight should be mainly cloudy with an overnight low of -12 down to -15 with the wind chill. For tomorrow, expect some light snow ending in the afternoon and then cloudy skies with a high of -4 and with the wind chill, a cool -8. After the break, BCN's Jeanette Rocher chats with Jennifer Ellis-Toddington from the University of Lethbridge Counselling Services about what mental health supports are available for students this fall.
As we're hearing more and more people are getting Zoom fatigue, we're really looking at how can we get out to the students and create opportunities to connect. And so we're looking at different things right now, different peer-led outreach opportunities for students to get together in the community or on campus. So we're looking at those things, possibly bringing group counseling on campus if we can get permission to do that. So different things we're looking at.
it's no secret that COVID-19 is taking a toll on everyone, including post-secondary students. Many students are struggling this semester with the idea of tuition fees rising, but services seemingly going down. Many students are stuck taking only online courses, but are they still able to access other services at the university, like counseling services if they needed it, for example? We're going to find that out right now. Our next guest is Jennifer Ellis-Toddington. She joins us from Skype. She's a registered psychologist and manager of the University of Lethbridge's Counseling Services Office. Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm sure that it looks a bit different right now at this semester at the campus on the U of L, with many students not there. Many of them are taking part in classes online only. I think you gave me a stat. What was it? 86% of the students are actually online students this semester?
Yeah, 86% around there of the classes are online, and people are engaging in online student learning. So the majority is online this term, with many of those students being first year ones. So
Absolutely, yeah. So that must be a little bit different for them not having that full campus experience. So what I want to find out from you is, since you're at the counseling office, is the counseling office open at the university? Can students still get the support they need during this time of COVID, when the university is sort of just operating at limited capacity right now?
yes, the university counseling office is actually open and running at full capacity. We physically aren't open, so students can't walk in to our office. However, we have all of our counselors up and ready to meet with students online. So all of our services have moved to telecounseling. That's either Zoom or phone sessions. And an interesting stat, I actually got some stats for this interview, that around our numbers since COVID, we've actually seen a 37% increase in counseling appointments this year from March, when the pandemic hit, to September, for counseling appointments as compared to last year. So that's an interesting stat. So students are still definitely reaching out.
So why do you think it has increased? Do you think it's because of the COVID-19 pandemic? Is it causing a lot of stress, do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely at the beginning of the pandemic, across counseling services, there was a bit of a dip in services as students were just scrambling to kind of figure out their lives and having to go back home and leave residence and things like that. But as the summer progressed, we noticed a lot of an increase in need, and so we actually implemented things like our pandemic support group and mindfulness for pandemic care, which were really popular. We had a book club in the summer that students really liked engaging in just to connect. So we actually saw an increase in our interest in group counseling and workshops.
Wow, and what did that look like? So I guess you're all on Zoom together, basically.
Yeah, we were kind of like all of us thrown into Zoom overnight. And, actually, I think some students appreciated a little bit of the anonymity just joining a Zoom group. It was a little less intimidating for a lot of students. It's quite convenient for students to do online counseling. They can do it from their home if they have a safe, private place to talk. And, actually being online right now, we increase our capacity to serve students because we don't have to do a lot of cleaning in between sessions. And, so we can actually see more students by being online right now.
So students that are taking courses online, are they being reminded that there is help still available to them? Because they're not there at the campus, right? So they're not seeing the posters, or they're not seeing the counseling office there to remind them. How are they being reminded that yeah, there's still help here for you?
We are trying our hardest to reach out to students. So we've contacted the Students Union group. I've done Facebook interviews. We asked them to promote our services, as well as our main ULETH social media like Facebook and Instagram. So we are trying to reach the students. A lot of us, our work is word of mouth. Friends tell friends, and we definitely get service that way. But we are really just trying to stay on top of students mental health needs. Like, they are definitely evolving, and so things that we were doing at the beginning of the pandemic has changed. So they used to want to maybe talk more about the pandemic, and now they're a little bit bored of it. honestly. So
I think we all
this
are.
fall, exactly, they're like, no more pandemic
Right.
support groups. So this fall, we're just trying to offer a variety of group counseling and wellness workshops. We have over 10 that we're offering this term. So things like, again, mindfulness is very popular. We have an anxiety and depression workshop. We have connection and support groups, to name a few. There's a bunch on our website. So students can, interact with our services as well as personal counseling, which is always the most popular and most requested service.
Right.
Yeah.
That would be that one-on-one service that you provide.
Yeah.
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 Now, now you yourself are a registered psychologist. How many psychologists are working there in the counseling office?
We have clinical social workers as well as registered psychologists, and we have a robust intern program where we train Masters of Counseling students. We have 10 counselors, and we have 4 interns right now.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. So that's a really great support group that the students have. Absolutely. Now, when they're in the group sessions, what's the capacity for that? How many can you have in at one time?
We look to around about 10 students per group. That's a good number. We can go up to 12 depending if it's a wellness workshop. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And then to sign up for that, they can just go through that online. And what's the wait like for it? Can they get in right away if they need it?
Right right now, we're actually pretty good for our wait times. We're around a week. As a semester gets busier, we usually look to around 2 to 4 weeks for students to get in, which is very, very good compared to community resources. So we have pretty good opportunity. It's free, it's confidential for university students.
Are you finding that students are missing that in-person experience at the university?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it makes me really sad. At the beginning of a term, you feel a lot of the energy on campus.
Yeah.
And so actually, we are looking, as we're hearing more and more people are getting Zoom fatigue, we're really looking at how can we get out to the students and create opportunities to connect. And so we're looking at different things right now, different peer-led outreach opportunities for students to get together in the community or on campus. So we're looking at those things, possibly bringing group counseling on campus, if we can get permission to do that. So different things we're looking at. We're always looking at how can we evolve, how can we be creative and responsive, because this is new for everyone. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine that maybe some of the stress is caused by just having that lack of interaction with people, especially if you're a student that just graduated high school, you didn't get a normal graduation, and now this is your first year university and you're not really experiencing it in its full capacity. That's got to be a little bit depressing, I would imagine.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, even within our community, I was talking with private practitioners and community agencies, and there's a real demand for mental health support, and experts are predicting that. And if you think about it, we've got multiple losses, right? Loss of rituals, loss of routines, loss of isolation, loss of connection. So, and collectively, our society, is experiencing uncertainty. So, those are all things that are weighing on us, plus financial stressors for students, for the whole community. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So what advice are you giving these students who are sort of suffering from that lack of connection and that are coming in with these issues?
It's tough. It's tough as professionals because we're all experiencing it as well. So I think just listening, supporting, helping them get creative around what they're doing to promote their mental health. We used to have these things. What could you do now? A big thing is creating boundaries and regular routine. Structure is one of the best things we can do for mental health, for depression and anxiety. So those types of things, telling them about opportunities. We have clubs on campus still, they're running. We actually have this awesome peer-led learning mentor program that's just started up, where they're called the Accountability Crew, and they meet with students weekly to make sure they're on top of their studies. So there's so many things happening at the university. So and we actually have intake coordinators working in our office now who, if you email us or call us, they do an intake right on the phone. And they'll tell you about all the different things happening at the U of L as well, not just in our department, but in many different departments.
Okay, well, that is so good to know. I didn't know there were still social activities taking place on campus. So people are
Yeah.
allowed to actually, if you're a student, you can actually go there. It's not
Well,
like
it
it's,
depends. Yeah, lots of the club things are happening virtually, and there
yes,
is restricted access to campus. There are certain areas and certain groups. So yeah,
right.
not a lot of open access. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what are the signs that family and friends should maybe look for if their student could be suffering from anxiety or depression?
I mean, the number one thing we always say is isolating. That's a bit tricky in a pandemic because we're all actually required to isolate a lot of the time. But, if you notice someone's pulling away, they're not quite themselves, that's a big warning sign. Other warning signs that we look at are low mood. Anything for over 2 weeks is something we would be looking at. Crying, suicidal ideation, other things, somatic difficulties or physical ailments. We see a lot of that in counseling. So maybe you start experiencing sleep difficulties or aches and pains, chronic headaches, maybe extreme tiredness. Those are all signs. As well as just general difficulties in regulating your emotions. Maybe your emotions are really flat, you don't feel much of anything, or you're losing it because they didn't have your bagel at Tim Hortons, right? Like really extreme fluctuations in mood, irritability, those types of things. We're also seeing a lot of generalized anxiety, existential anxiety. What's the future going to look like? Which does make a lot of sense. Panic. A big thing we do see is the complete opposite, where you might not notice this extreme structure. So someone's getting really structured almost to the point that it's causing problems. So excessive dieting or exercise, trying to find control in one area because we don't have control in other areas of our lives. So that can be a warning sign as well. That isn't as easy to notice right away. I think another big warning signs is anything that's reckless, any reckless behavior, right? That's in contrast to your life goals, right? So things like that. Anything really out of the norm baseline. And, I would just say, tell that person in your life, I noticed this, pointing out a behavior or something that you noticed, and let them know that you're concerned and that you're here to talk. I think that's the biggest thing we can do. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I was just going to ask you, what can family and friends do to support this person? So that's the biggest thing, right? Just talk, make sure that they
Yeah.
know that you're there for them, right?
Yeah. And you don't have to have answers. And sometimes just saying, hey, I'm feeling that too, can be the best thing that we can do because they don't feel alone in it, right? And oh, I'm not abnormal. Maybe I'm normal now that I could be feeling these things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Absolutely. So where can students, is this all available on the website at the university? Where can people be directed to for more
Yeah.
support and more information?
So just going to the main ULETH website and then under student services, we're under there, counseling services at the university. And we have all of our information on there in terms of what all the range of services and groups we offer, how to book an appointment, different resources in the community. So yeah, there's lots of things on there.
Well, that is excellent advice and information. And Jennifer, it looks like we are getting out of time here, but Jennifer Ellis Toddington, registered psychologist and manager of the U of L's Counseling Services Office. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing this information with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
The environment has made many worldwide headlines. Joining me now to discuss the issue is Dr. Kelvin Beisner, national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance, a group made up of natural scientists, economists, and theologians. Dr. Beisner, welcome to the show. We are so happy to have you on today.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be on the program with you.
All right, and I should have mentioned to you, you're joining us from Memphis, Tennessee, correct?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Now, since this is right up your alley, why don't you tell us, in your opinion, what makes a true environmentalist?
Well, I think a true environmentalist is simply somebody who thinks, I want to make my life the kind of life that leaves the earth a better place than when I entered it. We put it this way, that as Christians involved in this, we take very seriously the instruction from God to human beings in Genesis 1:28 that we are supposed to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over it, or rule it. But we don't want that ruling, that dominion, to be abusive, to be exploitative. Rather, we want it to reflect the way that God rules his creation. And what we see in the earlier verses of Genesis 1 is that God makes everything out of nothing. He brings light out of darkness, order out of chaos, life out of non-life, great variety of life. He instructs all the different forms of life to be fruitful and highly fecund. This is the kind of thing that we should be doing ourselves. So we describe this godly sort of dominion as men and women created in God's image, working together to enhance the fruitfulness and the beauty and the safety of the earth to the glory of God and to the benefit of our neighbors.
Now, you have written a book called Creation Stewardship, Evaluating Competing Views, in which you mention in that book that it's dangerous to put people or celebrities on a pedestal, such as someone like Greta Thunberg. So why do you say that?
Well, frankly, we need to actually know a lot about what it is we talk about when we pretend to give other people advice. And too often, celebrities, whether it be someone as young as Greta Thunberg, who began speaking out on these things at age 16, or Hollywood celebrities, many of them really, frankly, have never learned in great depth about these issues. I've been studying these issues since the mid-1980s, so it's 35 years in this, and even so, there are parts of this where I would not seek to speak out as an expert. I realize the limits of my own knowledge. So what we need to do is to go to people who really have true expertise on these things. That's why I put together the Cornwall Alliance the way we did. We have just under 70 scholars in our network. About a third are natural scientists, including some of the world's top climate scientists. About a third are economists and policy wonks, and about a third are theologians and philosophers. So we try to bring all of those different insights together to address highly complex problems. And if we don't bring the different disciplinary backgrounds together, we're likely to have rather narrow, superficial approaches to solving very difficult problems.
Mm-hmm. Now, you wrote an interesting piece on your blog with the headline, Global Average Temperature Plummets, Tropical Temperature Fall, third biggest on record. Were you trying to make a point there?
The point is not that that proves that global warming isn't real. No, it doesn't prove any such thing. The point instead is that what we get in the climate debates is that the advocates of the notion of catastrophic anthropogenic global warming, man-made global warming that is catastrophic, will point to every heat wave, every temporary uptick in temperature as evidence that global warming is not only real, but is potentially catastrophic, that it is overwhelmingly man-made, things of that sort. But they won't do the same with downticks in temperature. And so I'm just simply pointing out an inconsistency. If that brief downturn in global average temperature about 2 years ago was not evidence against, then a brief upturn is not evidence for. What we need to be doing is looking at very long-term data and looking for real trends rather than anomalies in the trends. And the long-term data do show us that the Earth's average surface atmospheric temperature has risen by roughly 1 degree Celsius since about the middle of the 19th century. And I think that human emissions of carbon dioxide have contributed to that, but the notion that it's catastrophic, the notion that it is overwhelmingly human, man-made, those notions, I think, are not well established in the actual evidence.
Okay, so we need to be careful not to fall into misleading information, basically, is what you're saying, whether it comes to social media or headlines. So how can the average viewer know what headline to trust?
Well, the self-serving answer for me would be to say, come to cornwallalliance.org, cornwallalliance.org. But, really, the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test all things, hold fast what is good. So this is why when we post things on the Cornwall Alliance's website, we make sure that we have links to sources of outstanding scholarly work so that people are able to check the figures for themselves, check the data. That's part of what we're supposed to do as Christians. And that's really the heart of what it is to be scientific. The Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman said that the key to science is that when we have a hypothesis, a guess as to how something works in nature, we set up experiments to see whether what would happen if our guess were right really does happen. And if the observations that come from the experiment, whether in the laboratory or out in the real world, if the observations contradict the prediction, then our guess, our hypothesis, even our theory is wrong. And it doesn't matter how smart we are or how beautiful our guess was or anything else. If observation contradicts theory, then the theory is wrong, and we have to go back to the drawing board. And that's what we get essentially in terms of the claims of very rapid, potentially catastrophic global warming. Those claims are all based not on empirical observations, but on computer models of how the atmosphere responds to added CO2. And the models, on average, predict 2 to 3 times as much warming as actually observed over the relevant period. That means the models are wrong, and they really need correction.
Well, so you mentioned CO2, and we were talking about headlines. So headlines tell us that CO2 emissions from fossil fuels is the main cause of global warming. But you disagree with this claim, right?
Well, I think it's actually theoretically possible that that's true. What I think is that the best empirical evidence indicates that it's probably not true. Notice I said probably. I think in many, many different scientific things, we're quite mistaken to speak with total confidence and assurance. I would be wrong to say, well, it's a settled matter that CO2 from fossil fuels is not the primary cause of warming. I also think it's wrong to say, well, the science is settled. CO2 is the primary cause from burning fossil fuels. Here's why I say what I do. It's precisely because the computer models of global climate predict 2 to 3 times as much warming as actually has been observed in response to the added CO2 in the atmosphere, that we know, therefore, that the models are wrong, that they are over-predicting the amount of influence that CO2 has on global average temperature. When we look back through the history of global temperatures, we see that there have been very similar periods of warming in the past, such as the Minoan warm period, the Roman warm period, the medieval warm period. We've also seen cooling periods in the past, and the interesting thing is that although there is a correlation between temperature and CO2 content in the atmosphere, the correlation is the opposite of what you would think it would be if CO2 were the control knob for temperature. That is, temperature changes first, CO2 changes later. And the reason for that is that as the ocean warms, it outgasses CO2. Ocean water contains CO2. The warmer it is, the less CO2 it keeps in mixture. The colder it is, the more CO2 it holds. So as the temperature changes first, the CO2 follows.
Wow, you are very much a scientist, I could tell. Now, I don't know how it is in the US. I know that our federal government here, and you're probably aware of this, but our federal government here is requiring that all provinces put a carbon tax into place. Do you think that this will produce any positive results?
No, I think it will not produce positive results. And the fundamental reason is this, that a carbon tax assumes that adding carbon dioxide, and by the way, it's very deceptive to speak of it as a carbon tax because carbon is an element, and in its solid form, it's a black nasty dust, and it can be a problem. Okay, carbon dioxide is not carbon; it is carbon plus 2 atoms of oxygen. It's an odorless, colorless gas that is non-toxic at concentrations 20 times what they are in our present atmosphere. And it is absolutely essential to life. Plants need it for photosynthesis. And the more of it there is, the better plants grow. So treating carbon dioxide as a pollutant is actually, I think, quite the opposite of what it really is. The more CO2 there is in the air, the better plants grow, and that means there's more food for everything that eats plants or eats something else that does eat plants. So the result is a huge increase in crop yields around the world. This has been studied in literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies showing that we have seen an increase in crop yields measured in terms of about $3.2 trillion of extra food from 1960 to 2012, and we can expect about another $9.8 trillion worth of food just because we've added CO2 to the atmosphere from 2012 to 2050. So you don't tax something that you want more of. You reward it instead. So no, a carbon tax would not be a good idea.
Oh, wow. Now, Dr. Weissner, you believe that the current global response to climate change actually could have some implications, especially for the poor, right?
I do. And that's simply because everything that we produce, we do it using energy. It takes energy to grow food, to process food, to transport food, to make clothing, to make shelter, to have communication. We're using energy right now in this Skype call. It takes vast amounts of energy to lift and keep whole societies out of poverty. Now, the less expensive energy is, the more of it people can use. And in fact, historically, it has been access to abundant, affordable energy, primarily through fossil fuels, coal, petroleum, and natural gas, that has lifted and kept whole societies out of poverty. If we're going to fight allegedly catastrophic, allegedly overwhelmingly man-made global warming by pushing fossil fuels out of our energy mix, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to raise the cost of energy because the fossil fuels are the cheapest source aside from nuclear and hydro. They're much cheaper than wind and solar when you count everything into the price. But two, we're also going to make that energy less reliable. The wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining. And because of that, you don't have a steady input of energy into the electric grid. That means you have an unstable grid. The more unstable it is, the more you're going to have brownouts and blackouts, and those things kill.
Now, a lot of Western nations are phasing out coal. How much of a problem is coal to the environment?
Well, if you burn coal in a really sloppy way, coal burning can be a very big problem to the environment. But in all developed countries, we have adopted ways of burning coal to generate electricity that are extremely clean. And essentially, the only thing that comes out of the misnamed smokestacks of coal-fired generating plants in developed countries is water vapor. It's just simply steam from the turbines and the cooling towers. Nothing else comes out. So coal can be badly used, and sometimes it is in very poor countries. And yet the interesting thing that happens, and we see this through the history of our environments and of our economies as well, is that even while air pollution rises in the early stages of economic development, as countries begin to use coal and can't yet afford the very, very highly efficient ways of using it, even while the air pollution rises, life expectancy rises too. And what that means is that the benefits of all of the economic development, driven in part by the use of coal, outweigh the risks. And then as people get wealthy enough, they can afford to adopt the cleaner technologies of using coal, and then you get rid of the pollution, and at the same time you have the benefits of that economic development.
Dr. Beisner, we're out of time, but thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your expertise with us.
Well, thank you very much, and your listeners can learn more at cornwallalliance.org.
Canadians have long believed that freedom of speech is a fundamental right. There seems to be a growing threat to freedom of expression on university and college campuses. Joining me now to chat about this a little bit more is James Kitchen, a lawyer with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining me via Skype from Calgary. James, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
Now, can you first of all explain to our viewers what the Campus Freedom Index is all about?
It's a report on the state of free speech generally across the country at universities, but it also contains a detailed report on each public university across the country, of which there's 61. And we give a grade to each university on their policies and on their actions, and also to the student unions as well. So it's an excellent tool, for example, if you're a student or a parent and free speech on campus is something that's really important to you, then you can go and look up your specific university that you're considering about and see where they stand on free speech.
So viewers can read about the whole Campus Freedom Index on your website, but how can you really get into detail about how some of the results are measured?
So there is a website dedicated to the Campus Freedom Index. I think it's campusfreedomindex.ca. And on there's a whole tab dedicated to our methodology. Right, so you can see the criteria that we grade each university on, and how we arrive at the grades we give. We give a letter grade, A down to F, right, just like you would get if you were at university, right? And if you're really good on free speech, you get an A. And if you censored something that year, you're going to get an F.
Now, 61 campuses, as you mentioned, were graded, out of which only 8 A's were given out. Are you guys being a little tough here on the post-secondary institutions, or are we seeing policies that maybe are infringing on people's freedoms?
I wouldn't say we're being tough. I would say that that's just a reflection of the poor state of free speech on Canadian campuses, right? If we gave 0 A's, I would say we're probably being a little tough. But those that get A's have earned them, right? The University of Lethbridge is a good example. It's one of the best every year consistently. Its policies are good, and they almost always follow through on those policies and uphold free speech. There's a lot of universities that have good sounding policies, like the University of Toronto, for example. They don't follow through on them. Right, so they never get a really good grade. Because in order to get an A, you got to get an A in your policies and both in your actions each individual year, right? So it's just there's a lot of campuses that don't have good policies, and they censor more often than not, and so they're going to get poor grades.
Why do you think it is that some post-secondary institutions are not committing themselves to upholding our freedom of expression, which is a pretty important right here?
Well, I think a lot of universities have lost their way. Right, their whole modus operandi is the search for truth, academic inquiry, free thought, free exploration of ideas, the consideration of all ideas, no matter how unpopular or dissident. At least that's what the university was founded on, right, for hundreds of years. But universities have lost their way, right? They have a very Marxist worldview about them, and Marxism is opposed to that, on a philosophical level, and that's pervaded most universities, right? So. That's just what's happened over the last few decades. They've lost that, and they've strayed into it's all about social justice now, right? Which is not commensurate with free speech. So naturally, we have more censorship than not, because that's a reflection of the ultimate worldview that's shared by these universities' administrations.
Do you think we're seeing a bit of a cancel culture making its way into universities?
I think we're seeing a lot more than a bit. I think cancel culture is something. Actually, I think campuses are ground zero for cancel culture. I think that's where it started. That's where it was born over the last 2 decades, and it's now spreading like a virus, I would say, to the rest of society. Right? It's spreading into the workplace. It's spreading into government offices. It's like a cancer. That is destroying the culture of free speech that a society needs in order to remain free and democratic. right? These institutions are not free and democratic, right? I mean, you say something the wrong way over there, and you lose your job, whether you're a professor, whether you're a non-professor staff. You get academic discipline if you're a student. It's horrendous what happens to these people if they don't speak the orthodoxy when they're on campus.
So in your opinion, how can students and maybe parents of students fight back?
Well, I guess the first thing is to get informed, right? I mean, this is a serious problem that I don't think a lot of people are really aware of until it happens to them, right? They're not really aware of it in general. I mean, I don't think most people think about the free speech situation on a campus before they choose it as the place that they're going to spend 50 grand on and 4 years at, right? That needs to be, if you start making that a criteria, right? I mean, universities are going to essentially give students what they want. If you want this cuddly little place where you don't have to see or listen to anything you don't like, if enough students want that, that's what they're going to get. That's what the university is going to give them. So if students and parents start demanding that free speech is a critical part of their education, then maybe the universities will respond a little bit. That's probably the first place to start.
Now let's circle back to the University of Lethbridge, James, for just a moment here. It received an A grade, but the A grade was given for the university's policies and practices, and only a C was given for the U of L student union's policies and practices. Why the discrepancy there?
Well, that's not uncommon. Student unions tend to be even worse than universities, right? Because they're run by students, right? And a lot of students these days are very, very progressive, socially, politically, in their worldview. Which they buy into a lot of the Marxist narrative and the social justice narrative, and of course within that narrative, within that worldview, there's very little tolerance for dissident or unpopular expression or uncomfortable expression, right? There can't be anything other than the orthodox view, and anything to do with sexuality or gender or race or historical oppression or anything like that. Climate change, I mean, litany of issues, right? And it tends to be the more progressive students that want to get into student government, right? The whole change the world kind of thing. And the business students who maybe take a more progressive or more conservative outlook on the world, they're not the ones that are running to run the campus, right? To run the student union. So generally their policies are terrible because it's all social justice oriented type policies. And, they don't tolerate dissent. They don't tolerate different opinions, right? If there's some conservative student that's saying something they don't like, that maybe questions BLM, for example, they want to shut that down, right? So very few student unions in the country, regardless of how good the university is, are good on free speech. It's not there.
James, let's also consider the increase of universities who received failing grades. Many of these universities, while publicly defending freedom of expression when pushed, they'd rather censor or cancel, leading to that cancel culture we were just discussing, events that they deem politically incorrect. What are your thoughts?
I think sometimes that's a reflection of the personal political views of the administration. Sometimes, but I think a lot of other times it's that the universities are not necessarily politically motivated. I think they're quite apolitical, but they're just very scared. They're not willing to take the risk and use the resources to defend free speech. So one of the most common examples that we see from the administration will say, well, there's a security threat, right? Antifa is going to come and pull the fire alarm or protest or smash windows or threaten people or push people, and we don't want to deal with that. So because of that, we're not going to allow this to go ahead. That's the most common excuse, right? Which, isn't so much that the university is necessarily favoring censorship. They don't want to see that happen, right? They don't want to see all this violence. They'd like people just be able to talk and it be civil, right? But when push comes to shove, there's a lot of universities that aren't willing to take a stance and say, you know what? Yes, this is going to cost us some money and security, but we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to defend free speech, and we're going to get security there, and we're going to protect people's ability to talk. We're not going to let people throw things and ring the cowbells and pull the fire alarms. We're going to do the right thing. Most universities they're not committed enough to free speech to make that expense.
Now, James, let's chat a bit about Jessica Yaniv, a transgender activist who until recently had filed numerous human rights complaints. Can you share a little bit of backstory and the outcome of these complaints?
So the backstory is that Jessica filed several human rights complaints against several aestheticians who specialize in body waxing, right? Specifically, what Jessica wanted was the waxing of the groin genital area, right? Which is a very specialized procedure. And these women, many of which are immigrant women and have, very important religious and cultural beliefs about being around a person with male genitalia. So they refused. And so on that basis, Jessica filed a complaint claiming gender identity and gender expression. So ultimately, those complaints were not upheld, and the complainants, or sorry, the respondents, the statisticians, they won basically. That's what the outcome of that was. A few more complaints were filed afterwards. Those were eventually dropped. So at this point right now, all the statisticians who were looking at trouble with the Human Rights Commission have won, and they're able to continue on, and they've not been penalized, and we consider that the proper outcome.
Have some of the complainants maybe taken it upon themselves to maybe sue Jessica now, saying you put our business, you put us through a lot of trauma and stress, and now we need to be compensated for this?
It was traumatizing for some of them, right? To go through this experience. Jessica did end up paying costs. It's unusual, but sometimes the Human Rights Commission will award costs when complainants cause a lot of trouble, as Jessica did. And so some costs were paid by Jessica and were received by the complainants.
Do we know how much?
Or sorry, by the respondents. I believe the amount was $6,000.
Okay. Now, is there anything, James, that can be done to prevent individuals from continuously launching what appears to be frivolous human rights complaints? I mean, many times these complaints make life very difficult for people you just talked about who are simply trying to earn an honest living.
It's a serious problem. There is, I mean, one of the deterrents, right, is the costs, right? Costs are used by whether it's courts or tribunals to deter those sorts of frivolous complaints, right? So Jessica's aware that if more frivolous complaints come in, there's going to be consequences. Eventually, I think there is a process by which we could petition the tribunal to declare Jessica as a vexatious complainant, and in that case, there'd be a further barrier to Jessica filing further complaints. And I mean, I'd like to see that happen if this continues. At this point, there's no pending complaints. They've all been withdrawn.
The Justice Centre has also issued a legal warning to Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro on behalf of a Calgary businesswoman who's prohibited from leaving her home even to walk her dog. What is this case all about?
So that's to do with the mandatory universal quarantine. Right. And what I mean by universal is that regardless of symptoms, regardless of negative test results, these quarantine measures are in place. Right. Which in our perspective is overbroad. Right. It does make sense so far as it goes to quarantine someone who is experiencing symptoms or has tested positive. But beyond that, it's a serious rights infringement. Right. I mean, it's essentially house arrest. Right. To be stuck at home. That's a penal sanction. Right, and people should not be incurring that unless there's actually at least some evidence that they may be actually infected. If there's no symptoms and there's a negative test result, it doesn't make any sense, and so it's a rights violation that doesn't have anything to justify it. So in that specific case, we had gone to court this last Friday to get an injunction. We were not successful, although we felt that it was a good case. It was worth the time. The judge was very receptive. And this is something we're probably going to continue to explore because these quarantines of massive numbers of healthy people has to come to an end.
Now, the City of Edmonton has outfitted the high-level bridge with 60,000 programmable lights through the Light the Bridge program. James, the City of Edmonton invites members of the public and community groups to request the bridge be lit up in specific colors to reflect basically their event, cause, or campaign. Now, in 2019, the Alberta March for Life Association applied to the City of Edmonton to have the bridge lit up in the colors of pink, blue, and white, and the application was approved by the city, but then later cancelled due to the polarizing nature of the subject matter. Can you explain how the Justice Centre is moving on this?
So we filed a court application challenging that decision. We're also challenging the criteria under which the city made the decision, because of course in their criteria, they grant themselves the right to cancel anything they unilaterally consider to be polarizing. Of course, we don't know what polarizing means. There's no definition of that, and it can mean anything under the sun. And of course, as any astute observer will see, any number of things can be polarizing, right? Anytime you have a topic on which there's some disagreement, and that's most topics in the world, you're going to have some polarization because you're going to have some people that agree with it and some people that oppose it. So we filed a court application challenging that as an infringement of free speech, right? Because the government, they got this bridge, they have lights, and the public is able to ask that the bridge be lit up in their color, right? So that's a form of expression, kind of a strange one. There's no words involved, right? It's just colors, but there's still expressive content. There's meaning there, right? When the bridge is lit up for orange and blue, everybody knows it's for the Oilers. There's meaning in those colors, right? So there's meaning when the bridge is lit up for what people want it to be lit up for, which means that that space, that bridge, is actually constitutionally protected, right? So the government cannot censor what colors go on that bridge based on the content, unless there's a good reason for it, right? So we say what the city of Edmonton has done is they've infringed the free speech rights of the March for Life, and so we're going to be seeking a declaration from the court that decision is null and void because it's unconstitutional, right? It's a breach of free expression.
James Kitchen, lawyer for the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. Thanks for joining me today from Flames Country, Calgary.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.